A time to remember and a time to say goodbye.
It was really moving, more so than I thought it would be.
Something you have to experience.
Bidding farewell to Benedict XVI, we have team coverage from the Vatican.
His last wish was for a simple funeral, but it was a beautiful one. I'm Melissa Corsi with a view from St. Peter's Square.
To the Diocese of Brooklyn.
A powerful and lasting devotion, even in death. I'm Jessica Easthope with how people in the Diocese of Brooklyn are celebrating the late pontiff's life and legacy.
How he changed the modern church and the teachings he left behind.
This was the Pope that kind of brought it together for me, like what is Catholicism?
The time of two popes is over, but Benedict's legacy is just beginning. Right now on Currents News. Catholics all the world over bidding farewell to Benedict, from St. Peter's Square to the Diocese of Brooklyn. His memory spanning miles, remembering a pope and a professor. I'm Christine Persichetti. Welcome to this special edition of Currents News. It was a beautiful tribute to a beloved pope, and it was a historic one. We have team coverage of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI's funeral, and we begin at the Vatican. Thousands prayed the rosary before the funeral even began, and the fog that sat heavy over the Vatican early on started to clear up as the Mass in St. Peter's Square got underway Thursday.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.
Amen. Pope Francis presided over Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI's solemn funeral mass, which was concelebrated by 120 cardinals, some 400 bishops, and nearly 4,000 priests. Benedict's wish was to have a simple funeral. While the service was based on the model of a papal funeral, there were a few changes since Benedict was retired. Only Italy and Germany were asked to send official delegations, although many heads of state attended in an unofficial capacity. And no final prayers were offered by the Diocese of Rome and Eastern Catholic churches, since those are specific to the death of a reigning pope.
Blessed be God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ.
It was a multilingual mass. English, Latin, Portuguese, Spanish, even Arabic was heard during the prayer of the faithful. Pope Francis delivered the homily in Italian.
Padre, nelle tue mani consegno il mio spirito.
The Holy Father remembered his predecessor's wisdom, tenderness, and devotion, telling the tens of thousands in attendance that the Pope Emeritus spread and testified to the gospel his entire life. An ancient sign of respect as the crowd applauded at the end of the funeral. Pope Francis blessed the casket and laid his right hand on it in prayer. Then it was taken inside for a private burial in the grotto of St. Peter's Basilica. The Pope Emeritus was actually buried in the same tomb where Pope John Paul II was originally interred in 2005 before his body was moved up to a chapel in the Basilica in 2011 when he was beatified. We spoke with Elise Allen, senior correspondent for Crux, and asked her, with the death of Benedict, will Pope Francis now reconsider retiring?
I don't know that Francis will consider resigning right away. He's mentioned before that he's open to that and that he would resign if there comes a moment when he feels like he can't continue, or that he's discerned that the moment has come when there's time for a change. But for the most part, I think Francis has a busy agenda, and he is somebody that wants to continue. We see that he has a busy schedule. Even this coming year, he has foreign trips already on the calendar, and he has a global synod process that he's extended for another year into 2024. So he's not slowing down, and I think while he might consider resignation at some point in the future, it's not something I think he's prepared to do anytime soon.
Yeah, he's a busy man. All right, there's been some talk about Catholic conservatives going adrift now that they've lost a pope they align themselves with. What kind of effect will Benedict's passing have on the conservative Catholic movement, if at all, any?
Well, honestly, like you said, I don't know that it will have a lot of effect. I mean, the Catholic conservative movement was around before Benedict, even before John Paul II, and it will last far beyond. always a change in tone around here, you know, like you have some papacies that lean, as you would say, more conservative or some more progressive. Things are constantly changing depending on the man who's in office, and sort of the movements in the church or the factions, right, haven't ever changed, and I think they will always be there. And I think Benedict himself is such a towering and important figure that he will continue to be a point of reference, even long beyond his funeral and his passing. You know, as one senior Vatican official put it the other night when I was speaking with him, you know, now he's not going to pray for Benedict, he's going to pray to Benedict. So the conversation with Benedict and seeing Benedict as a point of reference is something I think it's going to continue well into the future.
So really quickly, will Benedict's death open the door to new rules for retired popes?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. That's the question everyone is asking right now. And I think the answer to that is we don't know. Francis has given mixed messages on this. He's said, you know, before that he thinks new rules are needed, but he's also said in an interview, even as recent as last month, that he hasn't thought about changing the rules yet. So I think the answer to your question is we don't know. We're going to have to wait and see.
That was Elise Allen, senior correspondent for Crux. And from the Vatican to our own backyard, Pope Benedict's life and legacy is being celebrated across the world. And in the Diocese of Brooklyn, people are mourning the loss of a figure they say will have a lasting impact on church history. Current News' Jessica Easthope has more from downtown Brooklyn.
Sybil Smith is recovering from a heart attack she had in early November. Since then, she's been unable to make it to church until today.
All of Christmas season, I couldn't make it. But today I said I have to make it. You see, I'm wearing my monitor here. I could not miss this Mass.
Sybil's devotion to Pope Benedict XVI goes back years. She believes he gave her enough strength and faith to get to Mass.
7 days a week, I pray a decade of this rosary for him. He's a holy, holy, holy man. It strengthened me to love God more, to pray more.
On Thursday, the Diocese of Brooklyn held a memorial mass for Pope Benedict. More than 200 people, including students from a dozen Catholic high schools in Brooklyn and Queens, gathered to pray for the late pontiff. Bishop Neil Tiedemann was the main celebrant. He was joined on the altar by more than 20 other priests.
His whole thing about faith was that it was an encounter, an experience with God. And so that's exactly what we'll be doing today, is we'll be praying that he comes to see God as he is and to become like him.
Though these students were small children during his papacy, they said they've learned of Pope Benedict's impact as a teacher and theologian.
Especially people my age, because I don't think we're as connected with our spiritual lives. So it was such a powerful experience.
As a church, we all bonded together and we just decided to be here for him because that's what the church does. We love one another as ourselves.
After Mass, Bishop Tiedemann, Vicar General Monsignor Joseph Grimaldi, and Superintendent of Schools Deacon Kevin McCormick thanked the students in attendance and said their presence shows the true strength and a promising future for the local church in the Diocese of Brooklyn. In downtown Brooklyn, Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
The Bishop of Brooklyn, Robert Brennan, has met Benedict multiple times, whether it be private meetings as a bishop or attending his general audience. He told us what it was like talking one-on-one.
He was amazing. He looks you in the eye. You're the only person there in front of him. And there's this soft, gentle tone to his voice. But he asks you very interested questions. He looks at you, asks you what your job is. He asked me, well, so what do you do? What does that involve? How are you doing? He was just deeply interested in me.
Pope Benedict was actually the pontiff who first appointed Bishop Brennan an auxiliary bishop for the Diocese of Rockville Center in 2012. For more on the life and legacy of Pope Benedict and to see even more coverage of the historic funeral, just go online to thetablet.org. Still to come on Currents News.
Just kindness. He exuded kindness in every way.
How the late pontiff reached out to New Yorkers during his U.S. visit. Plus, the lessons priests learned from Pope Benedict and how they apply them to their daily teachings. And how the FDA is making it easier for people to get a hold of abortion pills. Cheers as if he wore the pinstripes himself. Pope Benedict riding through Yankee Stadium in April 2008. It was the end of a monumental trip to the United States. The cheers were a moment of thanks and appreciation. Just days before, Pope Benedict made history, becoming the first pontiff to meet with survivors of sexual abuse, rousing the faith of millions of Catholics across New York. Currents News' Jessica Easthope spoke with some Brooklynites who remember the moments.
The tablet was there to cover it all. The nose of an Alitalia jet came around the corner and into a private hangar in a remote area of JFK Airport.
We didn't even know he was on the ground at the time.
Ed Wilkinson, editor emeritus of the tablet, first saw the Holy Father through the lens of his camera.
It only lasted for about 10 minutes, and it was supposed to be a non-event, but to those of us who were there, it was really thrilling to see the Holy Father come.
Before he made it to New York, Pope Benedict met with survivors of clergy sex abuse in Washington, D.C. The closed-door meeting was a first step in acknowledging the evil and restoring trust in the church.
He wasn't a guy who wavered. He said exactly what the church teaching was, and he said there's no place in the priesthood for anybody who abuses a child.
Bishop Emeritus Nicholas DiMarzio was the first to greet Pope Benedict on the heels of that meeting when he arrived in New York. Bishop DiMarzio, a partner in working to combat and heal after the crisis. One, he said, needed to be dealt with aggressively.
Well, I think I was really proud that he did that. I mean, it was a big help. You know, you could see that he suffered through that area of his work first as a prefect of the Congregation Doctrine of the Faith, and then later as Pope. He recognized and you know, every time he spoke about it, you know, he said something that's terrible. It's a scandal, never should have happened, it shouldn't happen again. Those are the things he said all the time.
The Pope's fast-paced days in the Big Apple were marked by some iconic moments, like when he prayed for the souls lost on September 11th, 2001 at Ground Zero, in a city whose wounds of that day were still fresh, even 7 years later.
People's sensitivities were still raw. You know, to see him going down there and to kneeling down on a kneel and praying for those, you know, who had died that day, it was a very moving time.
But it was cheers not even the Yankees themselves could bring on that brought the Pope into Yankee Stadium to say Mass for 57,000 people.
You know, you got a sense of the immensity of the event, of the stadium, that this was a big place, and the Holy Father was waving to everybody, you know, and he had his papal cross. He was very well accepted.
And another first, on his trip to New York City, Pope Benedict became the first Pope to enter a Jewish place of worship. He made an unprecedented visit to the Park East Synagogue on the eve of Passover. Arrangements he made himself.
It wasn't something that anybody here had thought of or arranged, but he was known for being interreligious.
His departure was more like a party. 1,000 people, including then Vice President Dick Cheney and the Second Lady, saw the Holy Father off. He thanked Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio by name.
Just kindness. He exuded kindness in every way.
During his trip to New York, Bishop DiMarzio said a pope who had a reputation for being a harsh enforcer couldn't have been more gentle. Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
There's no doubt that Benedict will be remembered as a pope that changed the church, but he was also something else, a professor. The pontiff dedicated his life to learning and teaching. Some of those lessons even reaching and changing the lives of those in Brooklyn. Currents News' Jessica Easthope has that story.
This was the booklet from his opening Mass.
He's kept everything, every book, every encyclical, every Mass program. Because for Father Peter Purpura, Pope Benedict XVI was his inspiration.
This was the Pope that kind of brought it together for me, you know, like what is Catholicism? Where are we going as a church? What does it mean to be Catholic? Mass.
Father Purpura, now the pastor of Our Lady of Hope Church in Middle Village, was a seminarian studying in Rome when Pope Benedict was elected. He was standing in St. Peter's Square when the white smoke emerged from the Vatican.
It was like someone opened a dam and the word went out that there's a Pope and people just poured into the piazza.
May Almighty God bless.
Before Benedict was Pope, he was Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger.
He's been described as the most cultured man in Europe.
A man, Father John Cush, a professor of dogmatic theology at St. Joseph's Seminary in Dunwoody, describes as a serious thinker. As a teacher, Father Cush is following in his footsteps. But during the late 90s, while walking the same path, they bumped into each other. An interaction Father Cush says he'll remember for the rest of his life.
And then he said, "What will you study?" I said, "Fundamental theology." And his eyes lit up. And he said, That's my field.
That brief encounter solidified Father Cush's deep interest in fundamental theology, but more than that, his vocation.
The most important thing that I've learned from Pope Benedict, it's not about us as priests. It's about Christ.
Both priests say Pope Benedict's ability to teach will be his legacy.
I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that he was the most important theologian since the Second Vatican Council.
For my ordination, I had a prayer card made. I think his writings will still be read hundreds of years from now. I think that's how influential he will be with time. And only when God is seen does life truly begin.
He was Pope, a teacher, and a theologian. But for Father Purpura, Pope Benedict will always be remembered as the person who helped him see God. In Middle Village, Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
Now let's take a look at some of the other stories making news right now. President Joe Biden is heading to the border, making his first visit since becoming commander-in-chief, and he's announcing a new immigration plan. Meanwhile, the jobs report is out and unemployment rates are falling. The economy added 4.5 million jobs in 2022, the second most on record. Speaking of 2022, the NYPD has released its crime stats for last year. The Big Apple saw a big rise in crime, jumping 22% compared to the previous year. And city schools aren't faring any better. Preliminary reports showing enrollment fell almost 2%, continuing a years-long trend. Just months after Roe v. Wade was overturned, abortion has just been made easier. You can now get one at your local pharmacy. For the first time, pharmacies from corner drugstores to major chains will be allowed to offer abortion pills in the United States. Under new Food and Drug Administration rules, patients will still need a prescription, but any pharmacy can dispense the pills in-store or by mail order. The pills are already used in more than half of pregnancy terminations in the United States, and since June, they've been in even higher demand. Now to another grave concern. New York Governor Kathy Hochul signing a bill legalizing human composting last Saturday, making New York the 6th state to do so. That's when a body decomposes over the course of a month to become planting soil. Some see this as an environmentally friendly alternative to cremation. Others, like Dennis Paus, the executive director of the New York State Catholic Conference, feel differently. He said, quote, "The process of composting is associated with the sustainable disposition of organic household or agricultural waste to be repurposed as fertilizer for gardens or crops. But human bodies are not household waste. They are vessels of the soul." Still to come on Currents News, believing in prayer, the beautiful words one ESPN host said for NFL player Damar Hamlin's recovery. And pressing on with our papal coverage, we'll look back at the heartwarming side of Pope Benedict's life. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number, 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. While people are going to social media to pray for Buffalo Bills' Damar Hamlin, one ESPN host wanted to do so live on air.
We just want to pray, truly come to you and pray for strength for Damar, for healing for Damar, for comfort for Damar, to be with his family, to give them peace. If we didn't believe that prayer didn't work, we wouldn't ask this of you, God.
And their prayers may have been answered. Hamlin is reportedly breathing on his own now and FaceTiming with teammates. His doctor said he made a, quote, fairly remarkable recovery and improvement. Pope Benedict led the world's Catholics from 2005 to 2013, times of serious change. But it wasn't all canon law. There was some fun and games. Melissa Corsi has a look back.
From relativism to the connection between reason and religion, Benedict XVI moved hearts through the mind. Aside from his impressive list of books and encyclicals, his nearly 8-year pontificate also had some fun, quirky moments that are often overlooked. Without a doubt, his visit to Mexico was marked by this sombrero. As the Pope made his way through the crowds in the Pope-mobile, he decided to put it on, as thousands cheered him on. The crowd loved it, and the Pope didn't seem to mind. When it comes to gifts, Benedict XVI received everything from the moving, the spiritual, and the downright odd. That includes this 440-pound Easter egg given to him by the President of Bulgaria. It's made of steel and covered in ruby stones. Perhaps it's not very practical, but it's definitely eye-catching. The president of Ferrari gave the Pope this steering wheel as a gift. What followed was a quick but funny conversation.
Pensi un pilota quante cose deve fare durante la gara? Testa alla barca della chiesa, un suo volante difficile.
When the circus was in town, it made it a point to perform for Benedict XVI. After seeing the show in the Vatican's Paul VI audience hall during a weekly general audience, the Pope also got to pet a lion cub. It wasn't the first time he'd seen a wild animal up close. Years later, before his trip to Cuba, he got to meet a baby alligator from Cuba that had been smuggled into Europe. Even though he was growing older himself, as Pope, Benedict XVI visited an elderly home to encourage its residents to live with joy. The visit was part of the European Year for Active Aging and Solidarity Between Generations. As Benedict XVI addressed the group, he reminded them that being elderly is beautiful. He also went to the other end of the spectrum by meeting with a group of young children. The questions were endearing and the Pope's answers were relatable for any age.
La mia catechista, preparandomi al giorno della prima comunione, mi ha detto che Gesù è presente nell'Eucaristia. Ma come? Io non lo vedo.
Sì, non lo vediamo, ma ci sono tante cose che non vediamo e che esistono e sono essenziali. Per esempio, non vediamo la nostra ragione, tuttavia abbiamo una ragione. Non vediamo la nostra intelligenza e la abbiamo. Non vediamo con una parola la nostra anima e tuttavia esiste e vediamo gli effetti perché possiamo parlare, pensare, decidere, eccetera. Anche non vediamo per esempio la corrente elettrica e tuttavia vediamo che esiste.
So in nearly 8 years as Pope, Benedict XVI definitely left his mark, even before he made history.
That was Melissa Corsi reporting. Here's some other interesting facts about Pope Benedict you may not know. Benedict actually had a pilot's license. In fact, he liked to fly from the Vatican to the papal summer residence. But guess what he didn't have? A driver's license. He also loved cats. He even had 2 of his own. One was a stray he found on the streets of Rome. And Pope Benedict's favorite meal, Bavarian potato ravioli with pancake strips. Yum, making me hungry. And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. We leave you with one final goodbye to Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. Hope to see you again next time.
Nostris, et nostri